Welcome to the webinar that will be about the new book, Betrayal, the Failure of American Jewish Leadership, and will also be a bit about the Jewish Leadership Project, which is behind the book. And we have with us tonight, we are very privileged to have with us the people who put this book together and the Jewish Leadership Project, Charles Jacobs and Avi Goldwasser. And I'm Andrew Pessin. I will serve as the moderator for this evening's discussion. We'll start with a few procedural remarks. First, let me welcome everybody. Thank you so much. We have a nice crowd tonight. It's an important topic. It's a burning topic, as we will see as the conversation gets going. It's good to have a nice crowd here. I want to remind folks the webinar will be recorded. The recording will be available in a few days on the Jewish Leadership Project's YouTube channel. If you'd like to be notified when the recording is available and receive the direct link to it, then please subscribe to the Jewish Leadership Project's mailing list at the website, jewishleadershipproject.org. The chat will be disabled for the participants, but if you have a question, there will be some time for Q&A at the end of our session today. Questions can be submitted by clicking on the Q&A widget, which you should find on the bottom of your screen. Please do keep your questions short and pertinent to the discussion. That would be very, very helpful. So let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Andrew Pessin. I am a philosophy professor by day and campus bureau editor for the Allgemeiner by night and also by day and also over the weekend because the news never stops. The Allgemeiner is a wonderful news outlet that focuses on issues of concern about the Jews and about the state of Israel. And if you don't already subscribe to the free daily newsletter, in order to stay informed on all important issues, including the campus beat, which I'm in charge of there, please go ahead and subscribe now. It's allgemeiner.com and easy to just click the link. Myself, I am a philosophy professor, as I mentioned. I had my own particular epiphany some 8 years ago now when, due to some personal experiences, it just became crystal clear to me that the hatred of Israel, which is so present in the campus environment, just is a manifestation of anti-Semitism. And once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And I became committed at that time to doing what I can to document and resist this flow of hatred towards Israel and towards the Jews on campuses and, of course, beyond. So in the past few years, that's been my own primary focus. I put together a book called Anti-Zionism on Campus, which is trying to document this phenomenon of Israel and Jew hatred on campuses. Last year, I published a book called Poisoning the Wells about anti-Semitism in America, a timely book, unfortunately. And then most recently, I published a novel called Nevergreen, which is a satirical account of campus cancel culture with particular emphasis on its impact on the Jews, who are often the target of campus cancellation. And indeed, the whole boycott, divestment, sanctions movement, the BDS movement against Israel, which is flourishing on so many campuses, really is the beginning of the modern cancellation movement, canceling Israel, and in recent years, trying to cancel the Jews who support Israel on campus. More information about me and my work can be found on my website, andrewpessin.com. But that's enough about me. The main topic for tonight is, of course, this wonderful book and our illustrious guests. The book is Betrayal, the Failure of American Jewish Leadership, compiled and edited by our guests tonight, Charles Jacobs and Avi Goldwasser. This book, we should note, is an expanded version of a set of essays that initially appeared in White Rose magazine, which is itself a terrific periodical that you certainly should check out. I was privileged to write a review of this book for the JNS, the Jewish News Syndicate, came out a few weeks ago. I thought I'd begin by just reading the first paragraph of that review and acquainting those of you who are not yet acquainted with the book with what the topic will be tonight. You can hardly have a more timely book. I've said that about my book on anti-Semitism last year. It continues to be timely. Though anti-Semitism springs eternal, it has been springing particularly forcefully in recent years in the United States. As the editors of this volume put it, quote, American Jewry is under siege, ideologically and physically, in the media, on college campuses, in the streets of major cities, in high schools, and in Congress. Jews in the Jewish state are smeared, hated, attacked. Celebrities spew anti-Jewish ravings to tens of millions of followers. This is a new time for Jews in America, end quote. With this assault on Jews and the Jewish state, of course, come the debates about how to handle it. Some prefer to ignore it, keep their heads down, not cause trouble, hope it will go away. Some try to handle it discreetly, behind the scenes, quote, end quote, forge allies, reason with reasonable people. Some double down on their Jewish identity and go on the offensive to fight the anti-Semitism. And some, unfortunately, disavow the identity, join the enemy, and essentially convert to the other side. One thing does seem clear, however, as this book demonstrates throughout, the major establishment Jewish organizations have failed to respond effectively to the mounting assaults. Indeed, as more than one essay in the book argues, it's even worse than that. They've all mostly joined the enemy in adopting and disseminating ideologies that are hostile to Jews and to the Jewish state, that in turn lead them into alliances with groups that are openly opposed to and working towards the destruction of the Jewish state as well as of its supporters, i.e. primarily Jews. So that's the first paragraph. In terms of the major Jewish organizations that are discussed in the book, these would include the American Jewish Committee, the Conference of Presidents, the Union for Reform Judaism, Jewish Community Relations Councils in different places, regional federations, the Jewish Council for Public Affairs, and most of all, foremost amongst all of them, the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. So those are some of the organizations whose names might pop up in tonight's discussion. Those are the organizations who are facing the j'accuse moment, the accusation that they have failed fundamentally in their task, or worse. If their task is to protect the Jews, they've failed, or worse, they've joined the other side and actually fuel the enemies of the Jews. The book can, of course, be purchased on Amazon, and that link might perhaps be made available in the chat or easy enough to find once you go there. So it is now my privilege and honor to introduce our two guests, and then we'll get the discussion going. Charles Jacobs has, over 4 decades, founded, co-founded, and led several Jewish and human rights organizations, including the American Anti-Slavery Group, the David Project, Americans for Peace and Tolerance, and the Boston branch of the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America, otherwise known as CAMERA, another terrific organization. In the year 2000, he received Boston's Freedom Award from Coretta Scott King for his work in helping to liberate thousands of Black slaves in Sudan. In 2007, The Forward named him as among America's top 50 Jewish leaders. Today, Charles, along with Avi, lead the Jewish Leadership Project. As for Avi, born in Poland to Holocaust survivors, he grew up in Israel and New York City. Professionally, he's been a financial executive in the high-tech industry, but for our purposes, he's been an activist on college campuses for over 20 years. He co-founded the David Project, which I should have mentioned is a pro-Israel advocacy group on campus. He also served on the Boston boards of the American Jewish Committee and the JCRC. And of course, he's now working with the Jewish Leadership Project, which, as we will learn more about in the coming moments, is a national grassroots group working to develop strong Jewish leaders. We should also mention that Avi is a filmmaker and having produced the award-winning film, The Forgotten Refugees, which is a film about the plight of Jews from Arab countries. Also, The J Street Challenge, a documentary about this advocacy group that pretends to be pro-Israel, but in fact primarily promotes the Palestinian cause. That's my editorial comment. The film Hate Spaces, a documentary that illustrated how anti-Semitism is being made fashionable at many American universities, Columbia being central there. Oh no, Hate Spaces was more general. Columbia Unbecoming, another film which focused on that hotbed of anti-Israel and anti-Jewish sentiment, Columbia University, which is one of the sources of one of my degrees. So those are our illustrious speakers, and I thought we would begin tonight with Charles. So let me ask Charles, we'll start the discussion this way. Can you briefly describe the contents of the book and then tell us a little about how or why you came to create it?
Great. So thank you, Andrew. Let me flip the questions backwards a little bit, and I want to talk about there's a natural reticence among Jews, at least in the center and on the right, not to openly pick fights with other Jews. We are, after all, a small besieged minority, but we feel that there's a moral obligation to tell the community the truth about this matter that is so key to our well-being. That is the failure of the Jewish establishment, which most Jews, many Jews, believe is there to defend and protect them, but which is not. So we gathered together a group of writers, and some of whom are prominent, and some of prominent thinkers and writers, some of whom are unsung local Jewish activists who are heroes for fighting for the Jewish people in their local community. So I've got the book in front of me. Let me just run through some of the important essays in it, or most of them. So it's divided into two sections. The first is analysis, and Avi and I start off with what you'll hear tonight, basically the framework of why we're doing this and how we see the Jewish situation and the failure of leadership. Okay. Jonathan Tobin of JNS, who everybody should know by now, writes a piece about how the Anti-Defamation League, which is the Defense Department of the Jewish people, has failed because its leader has politicized it. Richard Landis, Professor Richard Landis, whose book just recently published, Can the Whole World Be Wrong? And the answer, of course, is yes. Richard writes about the problem that Jewish leaders have in dealing with radical Islamism. Josh Block, who was a senior person in the Democratic Party, writes about the moment which he calls the American Jews Kristallnacht, when the Democratic Party refused to condemn the anti-Semitism coming out of the mouths of its progressive wing. Rebecca Sugar writes, Are we getting the leaders we deserve? Caroline Glick has a fascinating piece where she argues that the whole idea of the two-state solution, which is the thing that gutted and destroyed American Zionism. Fascinating piece. Naya Lecht wrote how woke Jewish education has a forgotten Stalinist roots, which I didn't know myself. Bruce Abramson writes that American Jewish leadership priorities are antithetical to Jewish interests themselves. And Thane Rosenbaum says that it's all about cowardice and comfort. Okay. And then we have the wonderful people who are activists on the ground and all over. Mort Klein writes that he has seen that American Jewish leadership doesn't tell the simple truths about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and these are the ones that they need to tell, and that they're not telling. Alan Dershowitz talks about how he has been canceled by people who he used to be admirers, because he's seen as moving toward even more pro-Israel stances. We have a Reform rabbi, formerly Reform Rabbi Carrie Cosberg, who explains that the Reform movement left him and he can no longer be a Reform Jew. Zuhdi Jasser is an actually authentic Reform Muslim who explains that he went to Jewish leadership time and time again, explaining to them how they're being snookered by the Muslims that they are having alliances with, and they won't talk to him and they won't invite him. Rebecca Shingalis gives a firsthand account of how her JCRC in Fairfax, Virginia, is failing to protect Jews. That caused quite a stir, by the way. Karen Hurwitz here in Boston is a lawyer, and she explains how our own JCRC, which we have been fighting with forever, is completely missed the idea of how to fight against woke curriculum that's now in the Boston public schools and elsewhere. And then there are more. I didn't want to go on and on and on. But so we've gathered all of these people. We know that there are many, many Jews who understand the situation we're in, are beginning to understand the situation we're in, who also know that our leadership is not doing a job defending us and protecting us, but who are reticent to say those things. And by putting together all of these people, many of whom are prominent in this book, we want to break that ice jam. We want to say, this is so important that we must speak out and tell people what we know about who's defending them and who's not.
You mentioned the word woke several times in there, so maybe we can just start with, if you can say a few words about that. What is the threat that woke ideology or woke ethnic curricula, woke curricula pose to Jews in the United States?
Okay, this is very important. I don't think a lot of people quite understand this. Everybody here, all the 160 or 200 people on this call I think they are classic liberals. And by that, I simply mean that everyone here believes that regardless of race, color, creed, religion, that everybody in America deserves an equal opportunity to succeed. That ideology protected Jews and gave Jews platforms and helped Jews integrate into the society. And the Jews took that up and felt protected by classical liberalism. Well, what's happened behind our backs, almost behind our backs, well, behind the backs of many people, was that liberal ideology has been defeated, overtaken, swallowed up, and spit out by a new, some people call it postmodernism, some people call it progressivism. The common name now is wokeism, which flipped the game board on the Jews. Because this ideology, which is now current and reigning and in all of the schools, right, says America is divided into two groups, the oppressed and the oppressors. And that the only reason that people who don't do as well as others is because they're being oppressed as part of a group. So if, for example, theoretically, if there are more Jewish lawyers per capita than there are Latino or Black lawyers, the only possible explanation of this can be that the ones who have succeeded have oppressed the ones who have not succeeded. This has entrapped the Jews because now we used to be on the good guys team, right? We used to be on the team of the Blacks, the women, the gays, the trans, the Latinos, and we were equal partners, or actually senior partners of victimhood, right? Now we've been thrown off that team, replaced, by the way, by Arab Muslims, because they, after all, in this conception, are marginalized and discriminated against. And we've been put on the other team, and the other team is whites, white oppressors. So woke ideology has the Jews down as adjacent whites, emissaries of white power. And this is extremely, extremely horrible. And as it relates to Israel, it comes from that. It's that the Israelis, Israel is the biggest Jewish project in the world. They have tainted Israel. The Israelis are land thieves, needlessly oppressing darker skinned, indigent people. So we are all bad like all of the whites. And that's the reigning ideology in America. And the Jewish leadership, having put all of its eggs in the basket of being with those victim groups, now that those victim groups have turned on us, they're the ones from that spawn and spout the worst hatred of Israel of all the groups. Jewish leadership doesn't know what to do. It's caught like a deer in the headlights, bewildered, doesn't know what to do, won't admit that it doesn't know what to do.
And
that's woke.
Yeah, and it indeed, this sort of ideology is present throughout college campuses for sure. It's spread that K through 12. When you hear about these ethnic studies curricula that have been introduced in California or in Massachusetts and are going to spread all over the country, they're telling that same story. So entire generations of children will be raised on the idea that Jews are, by the way, you mentioned called adjacent white. They're sometimes called hyper white, even worse, like the worst of the white oppressors. Jews, insofar as we are successful on average, are seen as the worst of oppressors. And this is what's being taught in elementary schools.
I mean, the fact that your own prosperity is a mark of that you're an oppressor.
That's right. That's right. To be successful is to be an oppressor, and this ideology is spreading everywhere. And I think maybe you could speak a little bit to the following. Uh, when you talk about Jewish leadership not knowing what to do, this is a good moment to mention the ways in which they go to the other side, because we live in a moment when woke ideology is the dominant ideology. So Jewish organizations feel compelled to adopt it, right? And you see this, for example, in many Jewish organizations are all about promoting Black Lives Matter. And I'm sure we can all agree that with lowercase Black lives do matter. The Black Lives movement itself, however, is no friend to the Jews. But you have Jewish organization, or to Israel, you have Jewish organizations that have open agenda items to support and promote the BLM movement.
Right.
So can you
Right.
speak a little bit to
Well,
that?
Okay, so by the way, only certain Black lives matter. The Black slaves that are owned by Arabs and Muslims in 5 African countries, they certainly don't matter.
Right.
Right. The Blacks who are killed by other Blacks to a degree unheard of, unbelievable. They're Black lives that don't matter. Another example is HIAS, the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, which in its day saved a lot of Jewish immigrants. But when there was no need to do that anymore, they didn't turn off the machine. They kept the machine rolling, but they filled it with different people. And the different people they filling it with now are people from Muslim cultures hostile to Jews. They do not vet these people. We've asked them time and time again, are you vetting these people? Because we know that that's the population that's chasing the Jews out of Europe at the moment. No, they're vetted by the feds, right? So the feds only know who has had a bomb in the past and who has been related to an obvious terror institution, but they don't ask them about, what about the bomb in the heart? What about, do you ask them what they believe about women and democracy and Jews and Christians before they come in here? They don't. And this is, almost every Reform temple has posters for, welcome the stranger. Well, these strangers are being welcomed and they're dangerous.
Right, right. And it's probably worth stressing here, it is a wonderful value to welcome the stranger, but the unfortunate situation is that the strangers that are being welcomed are inhospitable to the Jews. And so that puts the Jewish groups in a very terrible, difficult bind, just to perhaps be fair for a moment to the leadership, to come out today, to come out against these movements, to come out against immigration, or against unvetted immigration, probably, to come out against immigration, to come out against Black Lives Matter will have you tarred and feathered as a racist. It's a very difficult thing to do.
That's because they haven't made the allies with conservative Black intellectuals who would explain better than any Jew. Just have Thomas Sowell come on and explain better than any Jew why about Black anti-Semitism. They are handcuffed by Black anti-Semitism. They don't know what to do about Black anti-Semitism, even though we all know that the people who are beating up Jews in the streets of New York are mostly not white at all. They're minority people.
Right, right. This might be a good time to segue to Avi, and I think we've anticipated one or two of the questions we were going to direct to you, but sort of a collection of questions. We had why is our leadership failing? And I think we began to touch on it just a moment ago, but perhaps you could elaborate. Can you diagnose the problem a little bit and explain why the consequences of failed leadership are so dire? Maybe we'll start with that.
Okay, but let's start with the facts as we know them today. The Jewish community is under assault. It's getting worse if you look at the last 2 decades. And clearly, Jewish leadership needs to take responsibility for what's happening. All right, and Jewish leadership needs to ask itself, why are they failing to stop or reduce hostility to Jews? Now, Charles and I have our own theories, and it starts with the fact, as I think Charles alluded to, that Jewish leaders are conflicted between their fiduciary responsibility to protect the Jewish community and their, I would say, leftist ideology, utopian ideology. And they're trying to square the circle. They want to be universalist and particularist. And if you go to any federation website, including the ADL and AGC, and you look at what activities they have, what they promote, it's not just the safety of the Jewish community. They're trying to protect, and their mission clearly states, any injustices, as if we, the tiniest minority in the world, practically, are going to try to save everybody else and fight for justice for everyone. At the time, we're under assault and we're losing, and it's getting worse. And the Jews are conflicted, okay? And they naturally want to feel good about themselves, which means they want to be universalist. They don't want to be parochialist. So often they sacrifice the interests of the Jewish community for the sake of being universalist. Well, life is hard. You can't have everything, and you have to make choices. But let me talk about the importance of leadership, which I think many Jewish leaders fail to understand. Number one, leadership is not a perk, it's a burden. And therefore, if you're not willing to have that burden, don't be in leadership position. All right? And too often Jewish leadership are there to feel good about themselves, to connect with other people of like-minded. And therefore they're reluctant, as Charles pointed out, to be critical of African Americans who behave badly or Muslims who behave badly. And they don't want to talk about leftist anti-Semitism because that undermines their own ideology. So we have to observe the fact that Jewish leaders are conflicted because they tend to be utopian, progressive, universalist. And the people who become Jewish leaders, think about it. Who becomes a Jewish leader? They come from, I would say, more social work, academic background. They're not fighters, okay? They lead organizations and they want to do it by being nice, under the assumption if we're nice to them, they'll be nice to us. They believe in reciprocity, despite all the facts. Who has done more for the Black community in America than Jews? Is there reciprocity? Why do we expect reciprocity? We project ourselves. Most people act in the self-interest for that moment, okay? So the whole concept of building allies, which we hear repeatedly from the Jewish leadership in Boston, has failed. As Charles pointed out, the people who want to be allies with us are ignored, all right? And the people we try to make allies fail us. They don't stand up mostly. There are exceptions, of course. So we have to start with the fact that the leadership is misguided, I would say utopian and delusional. They're decent people. I'm sure they mean well on a personal level. And they refuse to be self-reflective in terms of why are we failing? Why isn't it working? Why are you doubling up on a strategy that's failed for the last decades? And I don't think they have a good answer. And as Charles said, I think they lack courage and imagination. Imagination to try something beside interfaith dialogue. Let's have another meeting, another Shabbat with a Muslim. It's not working. It's not that simple. There are a lot of decent people on the other side, but the fact is it's not working. And to do the same thing and expect a different outcome is the definition of insanity. So how about trying something good? But they're not confident enough to go outside their comfort zone. And they don't understand that humans are tribal. And in fact, if you think about it, people live in tribes for protection. Otherwise, you're all alone. Everybody joins some form of tribe. And tribes are always competing for resources and privileges. And every warfare throughout human history has been tribal warfare. Look around the world. Look where the fighting takes place. It's all tribal. And we need leaders who understand that and protect the tribe. And I think their universalist utopian thinking prevents them from doing it. Their all personal desire to avoid conflict. They're all about accommodation, okay? Not about conflict. And I think we see the consequences of that. And as Charles pointed out, they fail to understand the changing world and the emerging new threats. They're stuck on this Nazis paradigm. The best example is Abe Foxman. We know what he went through personally, it's understandable. But this is the 21st century, get over it. Yes, the Nazis are a threat. They're not the only threat and may not be the biggest threat. So we need to think fresh about it. We need to identify, as Charles pointed out, the 4 groups that are against us. Yes, the neo-Nazis. Yes, African Americans. Yes, the Muslims. And of course, the progressives. And they all have different reasons why they're hostile to the Jewish community. And unless we deal with those root causes, we're not going to solve the problem. You cannot eliminate hate. That's a joke. Hate is built into human beings through evolution. You're going to hate somebody. You may hate Trump, you're going to hate somebody, no question about it. So let's not talk about eliminating hate. Let's talk about how do we manage the human impulse for hate. And the best example is what America has done vis-a-vis blacks, vis-a-vis gays. Okay, we need to inhibit that. We need to punish bad behavior. Sadly, as you may know, in New York City, you can be arrested for Jew hatred. You won't be go to jail even. You get some light sentence, some plea bargaining. If there's no pain to Jew hatred, they will continue. And that's the problem.
Just to jump in right there, I believe, those who've been following this for the last several years, nearly daily, in particular in Brooklyn, right? Orthodox Jews are being assaulted primarily by blacks and by Muslims, is my understanding, from small to large, having their hats knocked off or pushed, or occasionally cars ramming into them, things like that. And I read recently that in the last several years, not a single person has spent one night in jail for any of those. And we're talking about hundreds of episodes over the last few years.
Why?
Right?
Can you imagine if this was the case for people attacking blacks?
That's right. That's right.
Wouldn't happen.
So I wonder on that subject then, a couple of questions in there. You did mention the 4 particular groups, and it sounds like part of your collective diagnosis of the problem is that the Jewish leadership has focused primarily or even exclusively on anti-Semitism from the right, as opposed to anti-Semitism from the left. Have there been do you see any success, at least in that battle, or would you judge that they're failing to deal with the rising scourge? Because the problem on the right is also growing, at least in my subjective opinion here.
Yeah, but we've got the federal government, we got everybody against it.
Okay.
If Jews don't do anything, there's enough people involved. Okay. So I'm not concerned about them being dealt with properly. They're certainly the most lethal. However, they're being dealt with at all levels of government. However, when it comes to the other groups, it's a different story. And we don't have the Al Sharpton. We don't have anybody who's willing to fight for the Jews of Brooklyn. And fight means those who attack Jews must be punished.
Right.
Okay. If they're not punished, they'll get more attacks. It's very simple.
Are there any organizations or any individuals you could cite as being at least successful doing the right sort of thing? Obviously, you can be doing the right sort of thing and not successful because we're outnumbered, we're outgunned, we're outmanned, right? But the first thing is make sure we're pursuing the correct strategies, and then hopefully they can be effective if we have numbers and resources. So who might you cite as organizations or individuals that are at least trying to do the right sort of thing?
So I think as far as Jew hatred, I think unless you inflict pain on the Jew hatred, you're not going to make any progress. So organizations like Lawfare and the Brandeis Center, who use the legal system to punish those who hurt Jews. That's the key here. It's not another sensitivity session, no more training by ADL. I don't think it does any good. Holocaust education hasn't done much if you look at the results. We project ourselves as being sympathetic, but portraying Jews as victim, I don't think is helpful. As much as it is important to remember the Holocaust, obviously. The point is, pain works when you're dealing with people, all right? They need to be punished for bad behavior, so they modify their behavior. So anybody who's able to inflict pain or get the authority to do their job, we want Jewish victims to be treated the same way as any of the protected minorities.
Is anybody clamoring for that in Brooklyn right now? I mean, are there any how do you get the police to make the arrest? How do you make the justice system actually, the DAs prosecute these people and put them in jail? Is anybody even clamoring to do that for just the Brooklyn case, for example?
Not sufficiently. I don't know enough about Brooklyn. I know there's some city councilmen. I know some people care, but it's not enough. It's not vocal enough. It's not on TV.
I mean, the problem is not that the police don't arrest them. The problem is that the prosecutors don't prosecute them. And that has to do with a man named George Soros, right? And George Soros figured out a way to game the American system because he knew that a lot of prosecutors in a lot of locales, precincts, are voted in. And so if he could find progressive prosecutors who no longer believe that jail is a good thing for anybody, but that we should talk people into being better, if he could find them and identify them and then organize behind the backs of everybody else campaigns to install them in office, well, you've crashed the American legal system. And that's exactly what he's done. And yet, when people scream against Soros, who has done more harm to Jews than a lot of people, the ADL defends Soros and says, if you criticize Soros because he's Jewish, you're anti-Semitic. Right. This is ridiculous.
If I may, it's really worse than that. It's not just Soros. Soros is a problem, clearly. The governor of New York can do something about CUNY. No one's stopping her from doing something. The federal government can take action. They're not taking action. All right. So it's more than that. Yes, on individual DAs, Soros has done a job to undermine the rule of law, and Jews will suffer. We depend on the rule of law. Yeah. Okay. But beyond that, there are other political leaders who have not taken action because Jewish leaders have not forced it.
Yeah.
I don't understand why we don't protest every day outside the government mansion in New York to fix the CUNY problem. How can this would never happen to any other group?
Right. I'm sure members of this audience are familiar with the anti-Semitic cesspool that the City University of New York has become over recent years. It's been a real hotspot, many separate events, and perhaps to really capture what you guys are talking about tonight, you might have seen the video that's been going around very recently. There was a small demonstration, I think it was outside the JCRC of New York, to protest the fact that they were honoring one of the trustees of CUNY, a person who is completely behind some of that anti-Semitism. And captured on video was Professor Jeffrey Lax, who is a real warrior for the Jews. And he's a CUNY professor who practically single-handedly is battling this behemoth of anti-Semitism at CUNY. He said he has some allies, but practically single-handedly, being berated and even sworn at by the recently retired head of the JCRC in New York, who was complaining that he was causing trouble by protesting the anti-Semitism there. So you have basically a federation head complaining about the grassroots person who's on the ground and is a direct target of the anti-Semitism speaking up. And it was captured on video, and it's chilling to watch that. But that might be a good segue to the next question, which is—
Let me just correct something.
Yeah.
The protest was outside the New York Historical Museum.
Yes.
Where the JCRC of New York was
honoring
the chair of CUNY.
The chair of the Board of Trustees, I believe. Yeah.
And the person you talk about is the former head of the JCRC.
Right. Who
was deflecting the questions from Professor Lex by claiming that Professor Lex is dividing the community.
Yes.
Not unlike the Second Temple. I mean, you wouldn't deal with the issue. You just accuse those who do something of dividing the community.
That's right. So that's my segue to the question, which is clearly, and let me add actually one more small anecdote. Just my own local Jewish federation in Providence, Rhode Island. I'm not afraid to name names. I've been trying to have them bring in David Bernstein, who recently wrote a book called Woke Anti-Semitism, which I also recommend heartily, who does a wonderful diagnosis of this aspect of the problem that we've touched on tonight. And the response I got, they didn't want to bring him in. All I got was isn't a good fit. I don't even know what that means. Isn't a good fit, right? So you have the established Jewish Federation doesn't even want to hear. And so you have the charge that was made against Jeffrey Lax, and no doubt by others, that you're troublemakers, you're causing division, right? Like if you're literally challenging the leadership of your community, you're creating divisions within that community, obviously, that just by definition, right? So how do you respond to that? And then, of course, the historical example of those divisions in the community were responsible for the destruction of the Second Temple, if we want to go there. Right. Clearly, it can be problematic to divide your community. That's all else being equal. It's not good to divide a community.
Well,
clearly. How do you respond to that?
It's clearly hypocrisy. They don't hesitate for 1 minute to attack Jewish leaders in Israel. That's okay. You can divide the community, by attacking Jewish leaders in Israel.
Yeah.
But you can't attack them in the US.
Who are elected, by the way, by the people, as opposed to
Right.
these guys who are anointed by wealthy donors.
Right.
So
Well,
look,
So besides saying hypocrisy, how do you respond to this question or charge to you? You're creating divisions in the community, and therefore
I
that's harmful.
think the question is not what you're creating. The question is, are we going to speak honestly or not? The rest is the consequence. When you speak honestly, you may cause some divisions, but that's the consequence. The risk of not speaking honestly, the risk of not informing the Jewish community what's really going on is worse. There's always, by the way, divisions in the Jewish community. Now,
Right.
that's something never happens.
Right. Ask two
It's
Jews,
a
get
joke.
free opinion. Right.
These are
Right.
people in power who don't want to be criticized or very thin-skinned. Let me tell you, we had a meeting yesterday in Fairfax, Virginia. One of our activists was giving a presentation at JCC, and the head of the JCRC in Washington wanted to stop it, to disinvite her, to shut her, to cancel her.
Right.
Right?
I
Those
want
in
to say about the woke anti-Semitism and David Bernstein. And I mean, this is really a problem for them. They don't want to hear this because that's the thing that they have been entrapped by, and that's the thing that they have no answer for. So David Bernstein has been disinvited by this one and by that one, and Eric Fingerhut, who's head of this umbrella of Jewish federations, just divorced his organization from the campaign against anti-Semitism, which is headed by Sharansky, because Sharansky's group did a video about woke anti-Semitism and how it's so
Right.
dangerous to the Jews.
Right.
So this is the sore point right now for them, the woke anti-Semitism. They don't know what to do about it. They don't want to hear about it. They don't want to be confronted about it.
Right.
They don't want to be challenged. What is your strategy now that the world has changed a bit, and the people who you thought were going to be reciprocally supportive of us have turned on us? What are you going to do? They run from that question. So they can't have Bernstein come. They can't talk about woke anti-Semitism. And I just wanted to go back and make one more point about the left versus the right. Yes, the right is horrible. They come in with guns and they kill people. It's like a heart attack, right? But the left is like a cancer. There are no known Nazi professors on American campuses, but the left has taken over all of the most important cultural institutions of this country, which are the things that inculcate people in how to think about things, and how to think about Jews now is what they've got their hands on. And it's horribly dangerous. And our leadership doesn't want to deal with it.
Right. So that is the segue to the final phase of our discussion tonight, which is to think about responses, solutions, et cetera, et cetera. So first, I'll put this to both of you. What exactly is the mission of the Jewish Leadership Project? Is it to take down contemporary leadership? Is to try to convince them to do something different? Is it to start new organizations? What is the immediate goal? And then we'll talk about maybe specific steps that can be taken.
Okay, so the goal is to change Jewish leadership, right? The first step in that is to educate the Jews that their leaders are failing them, how and why, and how dangerous this is. So this is a very, very long range fight. We don't expect, it could be that floating down the river, Moses will come, we'll pick him up in a basket and he'll be but until that happens, this is going to be a very long fight where Jews are going to be engaging, and we are in the business of having them engage and challenge their local leaders to do what they have to do. So we have to shake up the bottle. We have to make an omelet.
Are you imagining that either A, just to clarify, change Jewish leadership, do you mean the current leaders convince them to behave differently? Or do you mean replace those leaders with different leaders in those same organizations who will behave differently? Or do you mean junk some of these groups, trash these groups, and really start new groups? What is the vision?
All of the above. We don't have a whole lot of confidence that the people who are leading these organizations will change enough. Although if you've listened to the head of the ADL in the last week, he sounds like he actually believes there's a problem on the campuses. Well, thank you very much. That's good. And I think it comes from the reality and all the pressure that's on him from the people who wrote this book and people who read this book. So there's that. There,
Let me add something, Charles. Look, you don't know what's going to happen. There are no guarantees.
right.
The point is, what we know is that if you keep exposing the problem, if you keep pressure on them, then something may happen. Whether it's new leaders emerging, whether the existing leaders are changed or something else. We don't know. We're too small. We can't control. We know that the wealthy Jews, the donors, control the leaders. They need to be educated about the fact that they're not holding failing leaders accountable. That's a shame.
Yeah.
Now, it may take time. It's a process.
Yeah.
So
I
our
need,
goal.
I need to say, excuse me, I need to say something else. You asked us about groups that were doing good, and Avi mentioned legal groups because they inflict pain, right? Right. We worked for 30 years with the best of the Jewish grassroots groups, right? So the first thing to say is that there is one legacy group that hasn't failed us, and that's the ZOA under Mort Klein, who courageously, indefatigably says what needs to be said, no matter what, no matter taking no prisoners. Even he will take a lot of heat for criticizing, the other leaders. But apart from that, we've worked with wonderful people over the 30 years. We're blessed to have known all of those people from Camera, from Stand With Us, from SPME, from Honest Reporting. All of those people, we decided to pivot and no longer do what they do. What they do is to attack the external enemies, and they're great at it, right? They're great at it. But we were doing that. But we decided that given the surge of anti-Semitism coming from these four ideological founts against us, and the amount and the increase of it and the danger of it, that we were putting our finger in the dike, and that we can't depend on. We may not prevail. The Jewish community in America may not prevail unless there's a changed Jewish leadership at a broad national level.
Right. So we're getting a lot of questions.
Andrew, let me just finish. Let me just finish the thought.
Sure.
Because I've been in a dozen startups. Each startup is an act of faith. There are no guarantees. This effort is an act of faith, the Jewish Leadership Project. However, I absolutely believe that there will be a change in the Jewish leadership. I just hope it's not too late.
Yeah.
All we're trying to do is accelerate the learning curve for them. It can't continue this way. There will be a change. It may have to get worse. I don't know how bad it has to get. So all we're trying to do is accelerate the process by educating community, putting pressure on the donors and leaders to rethink their strategy and policies. And what Charles pointed out about ADL, I don't know why they're pivoting. They're getting a lot of pressure. Some of it is obvious. What the heck are you thinking?
Right.
It's obvious. The question is, what's prevented you from
for years? It's years too late and still too little from the ADL, in my opinion.
So I'm confident there will be a change. I just hope it's not too late.
The worries and the pessimism. I'm a pessimistic person, unfortunately, so you don't want to hang out with me. But as at least what a couple of the essays in your book attest, the problem is so deeply rooted even in Jewish identity, Jewish day schools that adopt a woke ideology, that teach Jews to be universalists as opposed to being Jewish particularists, which again is not exclusive of caring about universal concerns, but you can be a Jew who cares about universal concerns as opposed to just a nobody who cares about universal concerns. So we've raised entire generations of individuals, and some of our worst enemies on campus are the Jewish students who work for, JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace. They see it as part of their Jewish identity to advocate for the Palestinians. And that's
another major failure of Jewish leadership.
It is no leadership, but it's because it's in the education system and in the generations. The problem is so enormous because the Jews themselves may not want this change. That's the worry.
It's always a problem of leadership, Andrew. It's always leadership. Every country, every organization is successful or fail because of leadership. Jewish leadership failed to create the right Jewish education.
Right.
So we have Jews for Palestinians, we have Jews for everybody but Jews.
Yeah.
Now, so it's daunting, but you got to start.
We also have the shocking problem that Jewish education is so unbelievably expensive and therefore not available easily to most people, when it seems to me amongst the first practical things we should do as a people is make Jewish education free for every Jewish child. And then, of course, the content of the education is important as well.
Well,
But,
look, our approach is, first of all, to make sure we agree what the problem is,
yeah,
as opposed to tell them what to do. They're going to listen anyway. If there's a recognition, we have a problem with Jewish education, I'm sure there are enough smart people who will deal with it. And part of it is the financing. But if you're not even willing to talk about the problem,
right.
no progress will be made.
So I know many of the questions in the Q&A are variations and versions of the following. People want answers, and maybe you're not able to give them. But one particularly, I think, a cute formulation of the question is, can you tell us 3 or any, up to 3 strategic doable actions that can and should be taken and continue to be taken starting tomorrow by every listener to today's webinar, except for obviously don't donate money to the failed Jewish organizations, like concrete things. What should today's listeners actually do tomorrow to accelerate the mission of the Jewish Leadership Project and begin this change?
Well, they should buy the book and send us money. Okay, that's easy.
Right, of course.
They should consider, thank you. They should consider becoming an activist and joining one of our activist teams around the country. There are 12 of them. And what they're doing, these activist teams are learning, we guide them if they want, learning how to challenge their local Jewish leaders about specific failures that they see and that they think that most other Jews in their community would agree with them, and to focus on that and to build a campaign of that. We send trucks around, like you know at the CUNY thing.
Yeah,
CUNY thing.
I love those trucks. Those are brilliant.
This was Avi's idea. This is
brilliant.
It was brilliant because getting Jews on the street, right? Unless you're a lefty Jew, if you're a centrist, it's hard to get Jews to protest things, right? But these trucks do it for us, and people go along with the trucks when we can get them to go. So the CUNY one was cute because the CUNY we were responding to Zionists out of CUNY. Our truck said jihadists out of CUNY, right? Immigrant ingrates out of CUNY. And it's, I'm sure everyone listening here can think about a JCRC that they have, maybe, or a federation or an ADL office that's not doing what it should do, and they can focus on that and gather people to focus on that, and maybe we can send a truck to the next JCRC meeting. And I think that's something that people can do.
Where you said you mentioned you have a dozen activist groups. Is that listed on your website? So
yeah, it's on our website. Let me answer the question in a little different way. Okay, everything Charles suggested is very important. However, it can be really easy. Talk to your family. Share with them what you know about hostility to Jews and the failure of Jewish leadership. Educate your own kids and your own family. Educate your neighbors. Educate your community. Raise awareness. Okay, now what we asked our activists to do, engage with local leadership. We need relationship with them, talk to them, ask them one simple question. Tell them the following: given the growing hostility, I'm concerned about the safety of my family and my kids in the future. And ask the leaders, what is your plan for dealing with hostility to Jews? And you'll find out they have no idea what to do, except the same old thing.
Right. Actually, we've had private conversations with leaders of federations, of even ADLs in many places around the country, and almost invariably, privately, they're willing to say that we're in a tough position. We don't know what to do about the leftist anti-Israelism, anti-Semitism. They will privately say that. But if, what we need to do is get an awful lot of people pressing them on that. Let's figure it out. Let's open up the question. Let's talk about Black anti-Semitism. Why not go and, there's a million things you can do. It's not,
right.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I see put in the chat was a link to the 12 activist groups that currently exist. And obviously, if one of our listeners lives in a place or city where there isn't an activist group, then one thing you can do is start an activist group, and you can start that activist group around this book. It's the beginning of the conversation. You can have a book, start a book club and start with this particular book. You could certainly invite Charles and or Avi to come speak to your group, either personally or by Zoom, I'm sure. And that's how it would begin. What about a very concrete case? This answer I just got from my own Jewish Federation, David Bernstein, not a good fit. What do I do next?
In your
'Cause I'm
federation,
sure in my federation, like that's a very concrete case, and I'm sure others on this call have had
Yeah.
similar things. They'd like to bring woke anti-Semitism or Black anti-Semitism, Muslim anti-Semitism as a topic of discussion in their
you
community.
start a
That-
campaign to bring David into the federation. You
Okay.
know a lot of people. You have a Zoom call with all of them. You say, listen, guys, this is a really key thing to do. I'm going to bring David in our little Zoom call to introduce you to him. I'm sure he would come. And we want to force them to have this happen. And if they don't do it, and we're going to send them petitions, we're going to make phone calls, we're going to call
a truck. Send a truck.
We're going to
Free-
send the truck.
Free David Bernstein.
Free David Bernstein.
All right. Why
Why won't the JCRC listen to the threat about woke anti-Semitism?
Right. Okay. All
Why
right.
won't you, Mr. Head of the aid? And you know what? The other thing we do, and this is victim Muslims, I think. So we could have a truck like this, but the picture under betrayed can be of your head of your JCRC. How's that?
Ooh, that's a little advanced for me. That's advanced activism for my taste, but
Well,
Okay.
wait, Andrew,
there's no doubt that's a brilliant idea in the right
Andrew,
circumstances,
we
right?
did that outside Eric Fingerhart's office in Wall Street.
After he separated because of
Yes, we had a
that
big
video, yeah.
truck
Yeah.
outside his office,
right.
his building, and we know he saw it. We know he was upset, and we know we got a call from the press, and they're doing a story about it. We got to get under their skin. They cannot get away with this kind of behavior without some pushback.
Right. All right. I think we're at just about at the 1 hour mark. So maybe we can remind people at this point, the starting point of this activism. The book is a good place to start. So please do pick up a copy of it on Amazon. If you like the book, please leave an honest 5-star rating and a review if possible. Distribute the book, get people to read it, get wonderful gift opportunities to friends, families, rabbis, Jewish Federation people, whoever's on your local federation. As I mentioned, invite Charles and or Avi to come speak to your group. Support JLP, the Jewish Leadership Project. They're the ones that are leading this. Those are some things that people could do. I wonder if you would like to close. I see, by the way, 2 things that we maintained 170 participants throughout the entire hour. Just now, a couple people left. So I think there's a burning issue here. People like, at a webinar, people start off strong and then they start trailing off. People stuck it out to the end. So that says something about this issue. I see there's many dozens more questions in the Q&A. I'm hoping that Victor or Ben, you can perhaps copy those or retain those, and Charles and Avi can have a look through them and maybe even answer people after the webinar is over. But
Sure.
perhaps we can now close with just a brief closing remark from each of you.
Go ahead.
We started with Charles, so let's go. We started with Charles, so let's Charles, you go first.
Me?
Yeah, closing remark, brief.
Okay. Well, look, this is not the America we grew up in. It's frightening to think that most of our physical institutions have security. I just met with a man this afternoon who built an 8-foot fence around his synagogue in Albany, New York. He's a wonderful person who did it.
Right.
This is a new time for the Jews. We need new leaders to deal with the new times.
Okay, thank you. And Avi, closing
Yeah,
words.
so I think I would encourage everyone to realize there's no short-term solution. There's no silver bullet. People ask, they want some quick results. Everything is a process. It's a long march. We have to take a long-term view and take the necessary step and hope to build over time enough awareness that puts pressure on the donors and the leaders to rethink what they're doing. So look at it as a process, not as a simple act that will change things. We could get lucky, but certainly we're not looking for instant results. People ask us, how's the book doing? The book is doing relatively well. The publisher is going to issue a hardcover. We'll have an audible version shortly, but it's not going to solve necessarily anything.
Right.
We have to do multiple things. The book is just one of many elements. And the more people get involved and do whatever they're comfortable with, they'll advance the cause.
Wonderful. And I will close with the following on that question of some of the good organizations doing the right stuff. I know Charles listed a bunch. On the campus front, which is where I'm focused, there's a relatively new grassroots organization, students supporting it. There's many groups working on campus who are doing good things.
Fantastic group.
But recently, in the last few years, Students Supporting Israel is an example of taking a new approach, right? And the people who are doing the previous approach is doing wonderful work. There's no criticism there, but it hasn't succeeded. And Students Supporting Israel, I urge everyone who cares about the campus scene in particular, which is my area, to look into Students Supporting Israel. They're really worth supporting because they are proud Jews, proud of Israel, and they are not afraid to speak truth to power. And right now, that's the situation we're in. The powers are all aligned against us on campuses and off, and it's time to make a change. SSI is making that change in that particular domain. So on that note, I want to thank everybody for participating. The recording will be made available in a few days. Remember, you can go to the JLP website, get on the mailing list, and get a direct link once it's available. And please spread the word. So thank you, Charles and Avi, and thanks also Victor and Ben for your support of this. And stay in touch, everybody, and let's get to fighting the good fight.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.